Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Lisa Mladinich. I'm a Roman Catholic, a professional life coach, and a Clifton Strengths coach certified by the International Coaching Federation and the Gallup Corporation. The Wonderfully Made show is all about the intersection of faith and talent. Our guest tonight is a well-known Catholic therapist, Allison Ricciardi. But before I bring her on, I'd like to explain that we'll be using the language of the world-renowned talent and personality profile, the Clifton Strengths Assessment. So we'll be talking about talent themes, which are ways to identify the powerful God-given potential found in all of us, and the idea of strengths, which is when talents are mature. It's when your natural capabilities become so well developed they become part of your personal style and help you perform with consistent excellence for God's glory and your greater joy. Because when we know our own design, we experience gratitude and greater confidence, love, and appreciation for the designer. Tonight, it's my joy to welcome a dear friend, a therapist, and a gifted Catholic influencer, Allison Ricciardi. Allison is a licensed mental health counselor in New York, in practice since 1990. In 2001, Allison founded CatholicTherapists.com, the web's #1 resource connecting Catholics with faithful Catholic therapists, so needed in our times. She recently launched a brand new initiative, CatholicLifeCoaches.com, to help clients find authentically Catholic life coaches. So to learn how a Catholic life coach can help you, download her free ebook, Live a Life of Purpose and Joy. I'll have that in the show notes. To find out the many ways a coach can help you navigate change and move your life forward. In addition to blogging on her 2 sites, Allison is a regularly featured contributor on spiritualdirection.com and mindspirit.com. Allison's unique ability to integrate faith, psychology, and common sense has made her a frequent guest on EWTN and Relevant Radio. Grounded in the belief that God made the human person and that the emotions and the spirit are inexorably connected, Allison is able to offer inspiration and hope for healing and true happiness, all with a touch of humor. To Allison, the Catholic life is a joyful life, and her message is one of hope in God's mercy and goodness. Welcome to the program, Allison.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here with you, Lisa.
Oh, yeah. It's always so good to see you. We always have fun. Now, first, before we start to talk about your top 5 strengths, which are showing on the screen, we'll explain that to our audience. Would you just tell us a little bit about the new website?
I am so excited about this new website, and Lisa's a big part of it, CatholicLifeCoaches.com. One of the things I've seen as a therapist for 31 years is that, therapy looks back toward healing, but we also need help moving forward. And I think particularly now, I think it's really God's timing on it, because after COVID, after all the upheaval in the world, a lot of people are in a position where they really need to reinvent their lives. Whether they're suddenly homeschooling or they're working from home and they're balancing that. Many people are losing jobs. So life coaching is, I think, so important, especially from a Catholic perspective, because like with the work you're doing, Lisa, with looking at our strengths and everything, I think that we need to realize that God has the perfect plan. And when we look at everything through that lens, we can really understand how he wants us to move forward. It's interesting, a couple of times, it's happened more than once when I've mentioned about strengths. I've had people say to me, oh, yes, but we grow through our weaknesses. And I thought, yeah, but we grow with our strengths too. And I think that we're not used to looking at that. Now, of course, in therapy, we're always looking at weaknesses and stuff. Now, of course, I do a different kind of therapy. I use the work of Dr. Conrad Bars, which is called affirmation therapy. So we're looking for the good. And what I've seen in most people is they're more normal than they think they are, and when we can help them to see who they are as God created them, wow, you can really help them to heal from the past and then to move forward. So I'm real excited about the coaching side. I think that, its time has come. It's really needed right now.
Yeah, well, something you've done, Allison, that I think is really worthy of mention is you've almost been prescient about this. 20 years ago, when you started CatholicTherapists.com, it just exploded. I was talking to one of your members the other day who said 90% of his practice comes through that website. That's how badly Catholics really want to find faithful guidance in the areas of their mental health, in that healing process, so that they can be fully present in the right now and live their lives well. And then, as you said, the coaching is taking it forward from that place of stability. But so here you are launching this at a moment where it's on your website and we can talk about it a little bit, but there's a brand new coach training program now being created and about to launch that's authentically Catholic, that's a certification track. And you're presenting not only access to that program, but a place for authentically Catholic coaches in a lot of different specialties to find their niche clients. And because there's no problem with licensure or state lines, we can coach people all over the world. So it's really an amazing moment as far as timing. With you launching this website, again, meeting an incredible need. You've always had an amazing instinct for that, and I'm just so excited about it, Allison.
Well, I think, both counseling and coaching are two very interesting disciplines that have really been invaded in many ways by secularism, by the New Age. So a lot of Catholics who might need help are very reticent to reach out for it because they're afraid of losing their faith. And I think particularly if you're bringing a child for therapy, you want to make sure that their therapist is going to uphold your values, and not only that, by integrating all the tools that we have in the faith, prayer, the sacraments, the wisdom of the saints, the fathers of the church. It's God's handbook for living is the Bible, so, and I think particularly in the coaching field, the New Age has totally invaded that field. So I think a lot of people who would like to go for coaching are afraid, or they go to a New Age coach, and it starts to really change your mindset. So it's like, to me, the loving universe, it's not even psychologically tenable, that an inanimate universe could love us, and yet everybody's kind of like going along with the lingo. So I think that as Catholics, we realize that there's a loving God who's interceding for us. There are saints and angels in heaven that are interceding for us. We don't need to kind of reinvent that kind of New Agey type of language or, look at it that way. And I think by working with a Catholic coach or a Catholic therapist, you can feel really secure that they speak the same language, because we're also not only trying to improve ourselves in this life, but to improve our lot in the next life. So, we want to look at eternal life too. And if we do everything with that kind of top-down approach of like, how is this going to make me the best version of who God called me to be, to accomplish the mission that God called me to, then, I'm working in the right way. I'm not just following my whims and following my pleasures, but like, what is really God's call in my life? And that's where I think the strengths come in, because that tells us a lot about what God wants from us, right?
Oh boy, it sure does. It gives us so many clues to how he wove each of us together, designed us for a purpose. And with that as the perfect segue, thank you, Allison. Just want to, for the sake of the audience, I will say a little bit as a coach about your top 5, and then I'd like to invite you to say a little about what each of them means to us. To you, excuse me. But what I'd like to point out, first of all, that there are 4 different domains in the Clifton Strengths assessment. The blue, which Allison has a lot of right at the top, is around relationship building. So Allison is really good at pulling people together. And she has something called relator further down that means that she's particularly good, and here she is a therapist, at that one-on-one, those one-on-one interactions. She can really go deep with people and has lifelong friends. So this can seem a little funny, almost like we're fortune telling or something, but it's actually based on decades of fantastic research done by the Christian Dr. Donald Clifton, but also by this incredible team at Gallup. He owned the Gallup Corporation, which also has Christian roots. And so we look at developer, empathy, and connectedness. And developer is that person who really delights in seeing other people grow, even if it's in small increments. There's a deep patience there and an understanding of the human person. The empathy is that person who can really notice and go deep with people in their emotional life. The person with empathy is pretty fearless emotionally and actually may have to manage themselves a little bit because not everyone's always ready for that kind of emotional intimacy. But as a trained therapist, of course, Allison would navigate that very well. If you look at her connectedness, typically that's the person who understands that we're all connected as the members of the human family, but also can make really really profound connections for drawing out meaning from everything. She's also going to be naturally good as a relator, as someone with empathy and developer, at bringing people together, making those kinds of connections, helping people come together who might really benefit from knowing each other. And then her ideation is a strategic thinking theme, and that's super creative, fast mental processing. The person who has more ideas than she could possibly ever create or follow through on in a lifetime. And then look at the belief as her executing theme, and that's a person with really powerful, unchanging core values. Once belief matures, I often think of the martyrs when I see belief. Those are values that will stand. Nothing will prevail against them. And when the person with belief is living out of alignment with those deep core values, they feel terrible. So they're happiest when a part of something that's meaningful, really greater than themselves, and they have that kind of take on it. So there's so much more to Allison's report, and have enjoyed looking at that with her. But Allison, just step us into each of those and what they mean to you, and maybe tell us some stories about how they show up in your life.
Okay, well, the first one I want to tell you is this. Do you remember how we met, Lisa?
Yes.
Okay. Pope Benedict was what was elected, whatever. Elected. Okay, I was so excited. So I said to my friend Irene, our mutual friend, she ran the most beautiful Catholic bookstore. I said, we should have a Pope party. So of course, I'm
bringing people together.
Right. But Irene did the implementing. I mean, she made the reservation, she got all that going, and that's where you and I met. Right, because I had the idea, let's do a Pope party, and we had so much fun, and then we met again at the beach, and that, kind of went on from there. So it's kind of funny, like, yeah, get these ideas. I'm not the one to implement them. I consider myself like an instigator, but yeah, so I thought that was really interesting. But when I first took this test, which was a few years ago now, and I read the first one, developer, I thought it says, the first description I read, it said that you see the potential in people. Sometimes that's all you see is potential. And my first reaction was, okay, that's made me a good therapist, but I hung in relationships way longer than I should have. Many times where it was going nowhere because I saw the good or I saw the potential or whatever. So I thought it was very interesting that our strengths can also be used against us if we're not careful. But by understanding that, empathy played into that also. You feel bad for people, So, it was learning, I think, maturing and learning how to kind of manage all of that stuff was really, really important. But, of course, when I read my report, I'm like, yeah, I guess I should be a therapist. I was already, But it's interesting because in the past, I had taken that strong Campbell interest inventory, which is also interesting. It'll tell you, it measures what you would like to do. In other words, like things that you'd probably be happy doing. And of course, that's pretty accurate as well. But I found this even better in terms of really helping me to understand who I am. It is kind of funny that relator is number 6. I mean, it's pretty high up there because my husband laughs at me. Every show we watch, it's always about the relationships to me. Like we like Chicago PD, not because I care about what's going on in terms of the crime and solving it. I'm always into all the relationships, like what makes me tick, which is interesting. And I think, it does all kind of come together with that. So it's kind of fun when you recognize it. I mean, I think everybody should really do a strengths evaluation because, like I said, in therapy, I mean, not the kind of therapy that I generally do, but a lot of people are always looking at what's wrong with them. And gosh, boy, do we need to look at what's right with us. People really need to understand that and own it. Now they may need to develop some of those, you may have that innate strength, but they also have to develop it. And you could probably talk better about that than me, Lisa, how we can, look at a developer, they got to develop it. What I'm saying? I think that, we have these innate strengths, but we also have to use them like muscles, right? In order to maximize them.
Exactly right. And it's just like a muscle. You might get your report back and say, wait a minute, I don't feel I'm strong in that. That interests me. That kind of rings a bell for me, but I'm really not strong in that area. It may just be a muscle that needs pumping up. And the
Mhm.
nice thing that Don Clifton discovered is that these natural talents are like super muscles. Even if they're completely unused when you start becoming aware of them and practicing and maybe pouring a little skill development and aiming them at some specific goals, really experimenting with them, they develop very rapidly. It's really remarkable. So we've talked a little about your developer and how it can make you so fascinated with the potential in people that you might get, it's actually a typical blind spot for developers is that people say, they get stuck with the projects, the people who everybody else has already given up on because they just can't quite give up. And as you said, that empathy dovetails in there too. Say a little bit, if you have more to say about your empathy, but also take us into your connectedness and where you're seeing that.
I guess I've always seen it. I mean, I can remember even as a little kid that I just did see connections with everything. I can look at like, just how things relate to one another, how ideologies relate, how things play out, how, standing up for a principle is so important because it connects to so many other things. If we give in, like I've always had the expression, you can never appease a tyrant because you see the bigger picture of what will happen if you do. Whereas I think a lot of people don't necessarily see that. So I think, just seeing that there's a reason for everything too, and I think that most of us, if we look back on our lives and we see how God has worked in them, there are connections there. There are things that kind of come back. Give you an example. When I was, I'd gone to school for counseling. I kind of walked away. I wasn't even particularly religious at the time, but I walked away because they left God out of it. And I couldn't figure out how you could heal anybody without that. And then I was contacted by somebody and wanted to interview me at their agency. And it was in the Bronx. And I didn't want to go to the Bronx. So I said yes, because I was polite, but I had no intention of going. I was like, I made an excuse. I canceled it. And they didn't cancel it. I rescheduled it. And then I was at an event and met them, and now they have faces, so I can't cancel them. And now that they have faces and they're real people. So God, there's connections there that God knew, if he wants you to do something, he's going to gently keep bringing it back to you if you kind of miss it. And that's another thing I think that I see, that kind of connectedness, how everything relates. I can look at even like life experiences, how they connect now, I mean, you could probably
Mm-hmm.
flesh it out a little. I might be missing some parts of connectedness, but I think, you know,
No, I thought that was a really good example because here you had, it sounds like kind of a thread of the faith alive in you, but not really maybe deeply living it or terribly aware.
I
And then
didn't
you got
want it.
connected with, it was a Catholic agency, right? God led you and you were going to turn away and yet you somehow got sucked back in through running into them. God used your empathy and your connectedness really to draw you onto the path where he wanted you.
Exactly, exactly. There's always something that he's working out. And I think that as we grow and mature in faith, then we just, instead of railing against it, say, okay, there's got to be a reason, there's got to be something here, and just kind of, again, to see those connections, even with other people. I think it's important to help them to kind of put things in context and see how maybe events from the past are connecting to where they're at now and where they're called to the future. So again, another therapist skill, right?
It's a great point too, because the connectedness does draw that thread of the continuum, the life journey that we're on. That's really typical of connectedness. It's a great observation. Take us into your ideation. I'd like to also just notice, since Allison and I have looked at the full report, the 34 together, I know that she also has activator, which means when you have ideation and activator together, activator loves to get things going. Gallup calls that the let's go talent. And it's a very enthusiastic, contagious kind of a talent that gets other people on board. So as a very strong relationship building person and an activator, which is an influencing theme, Allison is able to get other people on board to get things done. So if you would, Allison, step us into, and we'll circle back to all of these. I want to talk about where you succeeded using your talents and some of your struggles, but just step us into what your ideation typically looks like.
Oh, it's always a problem. Whatever idea I get, like I'm the Pied Piper. I'm going to get everybody involved in it. Like I'm always amazed. Like give an idea. Irene's store. I didn't know about her store, and somebody mentioned it to me, And I found it. And I told everybody I knew, like, oh my God, there's this great store in Huntington. You got to go. And they're like, oh, yeah, I've been there. You didn't tell me? Like, to me, I tell everybody, and I want to share, I want to get everybody involved in it. But it's interesting when you think about the activator. When I read a book many years ago, this Abortion, the Silent Holocaust by Father John Powell, it was so moving about abortion, about what's going on, and about a different ethic of life that took hold, that there are some lives not worth living. And I got angry and I'm like, I got to do something. And I tried to get everybody else involved also, because my first thought was, we'll get this over within a year because I'm just going to tell everybody, you know? And I was amazed at like some of the apathy or people like, yeah, I know it's really horrible, but they weren't wanting to do something about it. But I just got started. I wrote a letter to Newsday. They actually published it, and I just kept, I just got things going and started involving other people and doing things and going to schools and stuff like that. So yeah, if I see something that needs to be done, I'll try to find the right people to kind of fit in there. Like I just found out about the Rosary Coast to Coast, which is Sunday, and I found out too late. And I'm like, all right, I'll just get a few people together. But something like that, you want to just get people involved. But I guess, I guess that connects with the ideations. I do get the harebrained schemes. I love Lucy type of person, So, but it makes life interesting. Even if you don't do anything about an idea, just to explore it. And I think more people should do that, because I think a lot of people, and particularly now, where they're facing some terrible choices and they're worried, to sit and brainstorm ideas. Because God always has a solution if you're willing to brainstorm, if you're willing to listen, if you really, talk to other people, find somebody with ideation, ask them for help, right? And that's where I think a coach with ideation could be really helpful for certain people too. It's the implementing that I always need the help with, but that's not my strong suit.
Yeah, and as you said, ideation is a great brainstormer. Typically, people with ideation either have been told that they're kind of head in the clouds dreamers and their feet are never on the ground, or they've managed to harness it and kind of tame it. And typically those people have a stack of spiral notebooks or 10,000 notes on their phones because they just realize that they feel calmer in their own spirit if some of those ideas are written down, if they're saved. And so they can always circle back to them, but they can be so fleeting and happen so fast that it can be a source of stress and frustration for a person with that creative a mind who loves ideas and loves that fresh new, and with your connectedness to connect one thing with another and get the idea, to start a new website that will serve the new Catholic coaches looking for clients and the clients looking for coaches. I mean, you can see how a lot of this is playing out, and your belief backing it all up with those strong core values, wanting the right people to find each other so that the good transformative work can take place. Step us into where you see the core values playing out in your personality.
What do you mean exactly?
In your belief, that's those strong kind of unchanging core values. What do you notice?
Yeah, they're unchanging. I'm pretty set. I don't want to say set in my ways, but in what I believe. And I guess I'm always mystified by people who are not, because there are certain things that are simply right or they're simply wrong. And that there are certain things that are worth taking a stand for. I remember when I was younger, I was a little bit too young for the whole Woodstock generation. And I remember reading about Joan Baez and Bob Dylan. I was the rebel without a cause. I wanted to belong to something, something bigger than myself. And then being called into the pro-life movement was really amazing to me, really life-changing in so many ways, because you're doing something that matters. Even, obviously as a therapist, I'm doing something that matters. There have been days, I will admit, I've left my office and thought, why did I ever quit Food Town? I'd have a good life by now. They'd be counting out my draw and I wouldn't have all the stress on me, But I couldn't do that. It was always something, there's always got to be some crusade that we're on, and of course, when we're trying to save souls, I mean, what greater crusade is there than that? And I think the Catholic faith has so much to offer there. It's so profound. And when we can kind of integrate it, in kind of different ways, and it's what makes me tick. So it really matters, right?
Yeah. And I'll bet, correct me if I'm wrong, most people that are high in belief have been told at some point in their lives that they're stubborn because they see things so clearly. It's like it's an object on a table. No, that's right and that's wrong. And that sounds like stubbornness if you don't understand the living, breathing core value underneath. It's that kind of clarity.
Right, right. Yeah, you have to be able to explain it. There's always there's always a reason for everything I do. Even some of the things around the house. My husband shakes his head all the time, but there's a reason. There's some principle involved here. You're just folding the towels.
Man, household stuff. That could be a whole new segment for the show. Like, how do your talents play out in how you fold your towels?
That's true. Well, but again, like there's some meaning, and I don't mean like, religious meaning necessarily, but there's some thought process that I've had. It's not always right, by the way. My husband said, why don't you just do it this way? I never thought of that, but there's certain things that there's a progression in my mind of how it's, how it should be done or why it matters. I'm always very safety conscious. We were having a conversation once how my father was like that. And I was at my cousin's house, and my aunt, I think at the time, had oxygen tanks. And there were all sorts of candles lit at one point. And something almost caught fire, and they put it out quickly. I'm like, oh my God, the oxygen tanks fell. And I'm like, quick, blow out all the candles, because I could see immediately what was going to happen there. So I'm ahead of myself a lot of the time. People don't realize why, but there's a reason.
And part of that is the ideation is also a strategic thinking theme. It kind of can skip ahead and see outcomes. That's one of the possibilities with those fast mental processing. Let's just step into, I mentioned that people with belief or can be seen as stubborn, or people with ideation can seem kind of head in the clouds. When you look at your top 5 or any of the others that you're aware of, Allison, tell us about some ways that perhaps you or others may be mislabeled, some of those talents as either quirks or weaknesses, or, something to be corrected tends to happen to us along the way. What were misunderstandings?
Yeah, I definitely think the developer is misunderstood, that a lot of people would give up on people a lot more quickly, less patience with people than maybe I have. I'm not always patient, but I try to be, because I try to see that there's a reason for the way people might be behaving, or let's say taking too long to do a job or whatever. It kind of gets me into trouble, because sometimes jobs can drag out because I'm too sympathetic with, let's say, the person that I'm working with. But I think that, a lot of people don't understand that, and they kind of like, just, look at me. Or I remember, somebody saying to me, you ask too many questions. Because if I meet somebody, I remember we had met a neighbor, and I'm asking him all sorts of questions, not because I was nosy, but he's our neighbor. I needed to understand him. He was elderly. What if he needs something? So try to see what everything was. And somebody goes, well, you asked too many questions. I'm like, but how else will I get to know someone? It wasn't intrusive questions, but I truly wanted to know this person, and I think that's, as a developer, I enjoy meeting people. I enjoy understanding them, but some people really do see that as a weakness. Like, just you're there for what you're there for. And I'm like, yeah, but you're dealing with a person. This isn't like a transaction. We're always dealing with a person. And I think that's the most important thing for people to think about. And I think in that sense, that maybe balances that whole belief thing. In other words, that I can come across perhaps as dogmatic to some, but if you see, all right, but you can have a belief about what's right and wrong, but then how do you treat the person who's living something that's wrong? And that's where we have to treat them with the utmost respect and reverence, even if they're living lives diametrically opposed to what Jesus taught. Because how else are we going to draw them to Jesus, right? So we need to love them. So it's kind of like an odd balance, that I'm very strong on what's right and wrong, but it doesn't matter when you're dealing with a person. You know what I'm saying? So
yes.
the difference between having the principle and how you apply it to an individual.
Yeah. And that's a really clear, like, laying out that dynamic really leads us into an important understanding of our natural talents. In other words, they're not discrete, separate pieces of ourselves.
Mhm.
They all influence each other, and it's like mixing colors. They become all one person together. And so your deep core values for loving the other person and developing them are there too. Your deep value for their emotional well-being and our connectedness as a human family and so on. And so what we're seeing here is these things playing together. And you have relator at number 6, as we've touched on. That is a person who likes to go deep in those one-on-one conversations. And so and your individualization, at 9, is that person who can really see and appreciate individual people and their unique qualities. And so whereas you can move into that intimate space with somebody very quickly, someone might call you, have you ever been called a bleeding heart or a little too interested in other people? I mean, you just sort of touched on that, but do people ever throw that around? You're a little too much of a soft touch.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. But then again, then they see the other side of me where I could be very, no, this is right and this is wrong. So it's kind of like, I think it's a little bit confusing maybe for some people, but I think that whole like individualization is interesting. I don't like big parties. As much as I can get to know somebody on a very deep level, and I have a lot of friends and I make friends very easily, I'm actually shy. But I also find that to go to a party with just kind of small talk, where there's nothing of substance, oh, hate it.
Ugh.
I can't just like, I can start a conversation. I can start an intimate conversation, but that kind of like that banter, really tough, really
Yeah.
tough, because I want to actually get to know you. I don't want to just, kind of throw around the little platitudes and stuff like that. It's just not me,
Mm.
But a small party, 6 to 8 people, that's great because you get to talk to everybody, get to know everybody. I'm the kind of person that every stranger is a friend I haven't met.
Yeah. Yeah. And another connection I'd like to draw is your empathy and your relator both have really strong radar for authenticity. Do you find that you can spot a phony a mile off?
Mhm. I trust my instincts. I always tell people, always trust your instincts because God speaks in our heart, right? Not always with our head. You ever have somebody, oh, you got to meet this person. She's so great. She's this, she's that. And then you meet her, like, I don't like her at all. Because sometimes you're just picking something up and we have to always trust our heart because there might be something that we're not able to put our finger on it, but we can tell. And I can also tell sometimes when somebody's a really good person and maybe other people may not like them, but I could say, no, you know what, that person is misunderstood. Maybe they're wounded. A lot of people are wounded, that, right? So I think, yeah, just to kind of really get to know who they are and listen to what your heart is saying. I think it's very kind of like that intuitive, I'm not great at like looking at the data, like, or reading the instructions. I want to try it myself or have somebody show me,
Hmm.
So I probably don't score high on those things. I don't know what those strengths are called, but I'd rather kind of like feel my way, kind of get a sense of it. That's why I don't really enjoy computers. I don't enjoy filing and stuff like that because it's a different way that your brain works, right?
Hmm.
Those,
Yeah.
those are the people you hire.
Yes, exactly. And the empathy, one of the deep needs of people with empathy is the space, the kind of the people to allow them to go with their guts, not to be forced into a particular decision by somebody else's. Maybe someone else is really analytical, and as far as the numbers go, this is the right choice. But you're going to have the need. Anyone high in empathy is going to have that need to step back a little, have a little space to consider and to pray, and go with more of a gut-led response.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I don't make a very good employee whenever I've worked in places where if it doesn't make sense to me. I remember when I was a teenager, I was working at a department store and I was always a good worker. I was always very responsible, but they said, well, the bosses don't like to see people standing around. So even if everything is neat, unfold those sweaters and refold them. I said, I'm not doing that. That's just stupid. Like, I'm not going to do it. So it was like, that was a principle there, right? So
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They're trying to put on a little show there. It was something inauthentic.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was not
Because
going to
I
fly.
guess I was of the mind that, well, if you know me well enough, you know that I'm responsible. Like, I don't want to play that little dog and pony show, so, oh, that's me.
Yeah. So when you look back at your talents, Allison, and you kind of look at in the context of having gone through the report and maybe a new way of naming things and kind of owning them in a new way, how did that shift for you as far as how you saw yourself when you were able to name the talents and go a little deeper on each of them?
I don't know if it shifted the way I see myself, but it was nice to be able to identify it and feel more confident in living in my own lane of what is right for me. Because other people have other talents. Like I said, I'm terrible at filing and all of that. And I've got an assistant who's awesome at it. I think I admire people who do, because it's just not the way that I work. But, owning the way I work and knowing what I should be doing and what I shouldn't be doing. I think that's really important. I think once you understand what your own gifts and talents are, you don't want to waste so much time doing the things that you really, really struggle with. Like I'm looking at my lowest ones, looking at my top 34, my 34, something like significance is number 33. And when I read that, I mean, it didn't seem like anything I could relate to at all, that you want to be known, you want to be, how do they say it?
The person in the limelight kind of a thing.
Yeah. And I'm not at all driven by that at all.
Yeah.
We were talking the other day, I'm more the one that would kind of like get the idea to pull a prank on the teacher, get people involved in it and let them take the credit. And I just sit there self-satisfied knowing that I was behind it. The teacher will never know who got the credit,
Right, exactly. Oh my gosh, it's so interesting that you said it gave you confidence to be in your own lane, because that's very typical. And one of the most important things that I see in virtually all of my clients is a big confidence boost. Because especially if you're a believer and you believe that you were intentionally designed by God, before I knew you, I called you by name. Before, God knew what would be written in the book of life about you. He claimed and named your talents before you took up your first breath. And so when you start to see that and you see the intentionality of God and how beautifully made you are, regardless of what anyone else wants to say about you, you can say, God gave this to me. Right. It's purposed. It is alive in me. And so I honor the designer when I live it out and I stand in that. And I love also that you pointed out, there are some things you're just never going to be good at. We're all good at some things and not at others. What a great opportunity, especially with your positivity and your individualization, to be able to see the best in others and call it out, to be able to take the right person and say, hey, you're great at that. Thank you. And give them an opportunity to shine. That's really an important part of that whole understanding of our strengths. We then start to appreciate leveraging our own and each other's talents. And then everybody gets lifted up.
Right. And like you said, to kind of look at other people's talents and to be able to affirm them in it and recognize that, let's say like significance, my niece is an artist and she's driven, her top strength was significance. I was like, whoa, I can't relate, but I could certainly understand what drives her. And then it's not a weakness, it's a strength. So I think by understanding that and just giving yourself permission not to be, what you're not, and to kind of be, like I said, I think I like that word, the intentionality of God, that he had a purpose and a plan. And, I guess depending on how everybody mixes up all their different strengths and stuff, you get all these different reflections of God ultimately, right? The different strengths that he has or that are manifested in the saints and stuff like that. It's really kind of cool, those differences in people. Like you look at, let's say, a contemplative, or somebody like Padre Pio, who was pretty active and, it's kind of really interesting, or John Paul II. So when we look at that, and I think when we can look at everybody through that view of their strengths, and again, that goes very much with affirmation therapy, of seeing what's right with somebody. And Dr. Bars would have described affirmation as the ability to see the good in the other person, to be present to all that's good and beautiful and true in that person, to allow myself to be moved in my heart by their goodness and reflect it back to them in a way that they can feel. All right, that's the essence of affirmation. So think about that. This is, I think the strengths come into that. I've recommended to my clients over the years, to do a strengths test so they can start to own that they can see, yes, this is the unique person that I am. And this thing that maybe I thought was a bad thing is actually a strength if I know how to use it and I know how to harness it better, right? So like I gave that example of developer, great as a therapist, not always the best thing in a bad relationship, right? So looking at that and saying, okay, so where can I use this and not use it elsewhere, right? Not take on all the projects, so.
Yeah. When you think about Allison, we touched on in the opening kind of your bio, talking about helping people navigate change and all of that and move into new seasons in their lives. When you think about where God is calling you in this season of your life, how do you see maybe harnessing your talents for the next steps that God is calling you to?
Well, I definitely think, moving more toward the ideation and the connectedness. I mean, the developer is always there, but I think after 31 years as a therapist, I mean, I'm no longer taking on clients. I'm really building Catholic therapists and Catholic life coaches because I see the amazing talent that's out there. I mean, we've been online 20 years. Some of my members have been with us for 20 years, and I'm so impressed by the quality of the therapists that sign up, their dedication, because they're all motivated the same way in terms of the Catholic faith. And I'm seeing the same thing with the coaches. I mean, we're pretty new, but we got quite a lineup there. And it's really exciting to me. So my developer now is really being activated, if you want to say, to kind of really promote everybody else, because I so much believe in what everybody's doing and the need. There's such tremendous need out there. There's so many people suffering out there. And there's so many people that are kind of floating. Like I look at there are certain things in life that are known to predispose us, let's say, to depression. So something like retirement, moving, a job loss, a job change. And that's where I think by being proactive with coaching, we can head that off by making plans and having some excitement about the future. So I see that, I think, is something that's going to be really important, particularly as we're going through the time that we're going through. That if we can, instead of just retiring like, oh my gosh, now what? Having somebody work with a coach and say, okay, this is changing in my life, or maybe there's a loss of a spouse or whatever, to be able to kind of tease out, what is God calling me to now, and how do I get there? So you could be excited about the future, because ultimately we should all be excited about our eternal future, right? If we're living right, that God has so many great things planned in heaven. And of course, I'm of the mind, the one who dies with the most souls wins, right? That's the best thing. When you get to heaven, you want to bring a lot of people with you. So that's what kind of like, makes me tick in terms of if we can help people to heal. A lot of people fall into sin because they're wounded, right? They're weakened. So the more people that we can help to heal, and the more people we can help to move forward in a positive way, we're gonna populate heaven that way, right? And there's a tremendous need, and particularly right now, we're dealing with so much hopelessness. I don't see it that way. I think there's great hope. Mary said her heart would triumph. It's gonna triumph. So these are exciting times to be living in if we're, kind of living in your strengths and moving towards something really positive and believing that there's something positive in the future.
Yeah, amen. Because we are called to live an abundant life. We know from John 10:10, we're also called to be that city on a hill, a shining city on a hill, warts and all. I just want to touch on that because we are not talking about, when we focus on strengths, sweeping sin under the rug. This stuff goes right off the rails if we're not founded in our identity in Christ. If Catholics are not leading, a dedicated sacramental life, a lot of this stuff can fall into a worldly way of thinking about talent, and it can be very ego connected instead of thinking about how am I gifted and called, woven together so lovingly as a beloved child of God, and then purposed. Where is God, calling me into a greater vision for my life? So as we kind of start to wrap up here, Allison, what are some final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with? Just anything to do with your understanding or the importance of kind of how we're woven together, or what the importance is of this work.
Well, I think when we see, like you said, that we have certain gifts and talents that were given to us by God, And when we can embrace them and live them, I think we're going to be less prone to sin. All right. Sin is usually because of weakness, right? And weakness is because maybe we're trying to do things that we're not supposed to be doing, right? So I think if we just say, I always like to look at, like, from a Catholic perspective, is it consistent with your state in life? Is always a really important question before we make decisions. All right. So let's say you're a married woman with 3 children, and gee, I got this great opportunity to go to Hollywood and make a movie, and you're going to be gone for 2 years. Probably not really your calling, because you have certain responsibilities there. It's not consistent with your state in life. So if we think of that, there's got to be a consistency with who you are if you're going to flourish and thrive, right? We have to know who we are and be living in that. Now, that doesn't mean that we still don't have weaknesses. Still doesn't mean that we can't sin. But I think that when we're not kind of dragging ourselves, against the grain, all right, trying to be something that we're not. All right. So let's say, this is where I think feminism really kind of messed us up. Always striving towards something that maybe we're not really called to. And then we are going to be kind of falling into sin that way, because we're kind of working at odds with God. But when we look at it, and I think, and again, this is my connectedness, when we know that there's a reason for everything, and there's a purpose for everything, and those gifts that he gave us, that he wants us to use them, and that we see them as gifts. All right. These are not just like happenstance, but gifts. This was something he deliberately put into us even before we were created, from the dawn of creation. That is so meaningful now, right? We're not just accidents of nature. Well, then everything in life is in its proper perspective, all right? Because we are beloved children of God, created by him with a loving purpose, and that we're going to spend eternity with him. Like, you think of Saint Therese, right? That I will spend my heaven doing good upon earth, of letting fall from heaven a shower of roses. I've often said that I want to be the patron saint of shopping. So there cards, you get coupons. I want to be used in heaven some way. But think about that. I mean, will our work continue in heaven? We will be praying there, right? So, but we won't be working there. All right. We'll be just living who we are, living our strengths, right? Who God created us to be. And it's going to be very unique for each person, right?
Yeah, and you think of those strengths as undergirding the vocation and making it unique. And Romans 11:29 says that we are irrevocably gifted and called by God. So I've even read some Catholic spiritual writers say that our vocations never end, that our vocations in some beautiful way are eternal. And so our bodies, our minds, our spirits will all be glorified in heaven. Just imagine what your talents will look like then. So let's start using them and putting them out there and letting God paint with those colors.
Right. And that, that's an interesting thought, though. If we were to picture what the perfect heaven would be for us, I bet you'd figure out your strengths.
Ooh.
To be able to spend time with people without having to leave, without having, to just enjoy people and get to know them, and to kind of really be, kind of like in these intimate relationships, that would be heaven to me, right? And maybe coming up with ideas of what we can, do on earth from up there. I think it'd be really cool. So I think if you think about what you expect heaven to be, that might also give you, somebody might want to be organizing heaven. I don't,
All right. Allison, thank you so much. I always love your point of view and your sense of humor. I think that's why so many people have relied on you over the years to help them find that joy in their lives again. And you continue to invent and innovate and help others. Everybody, stop by CatholicLifeCoaches.com and download Allison's freebie, Live a Life of Purpose and Joy, How a Catholic Life Coach Can Move You from Ordinary to Extraordinary. And Allison, can't thank you enough. It's really been just a joy having you with us.
Great fun, Lisa. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for being with us, everyone. To learn more about growing in your natural talents, please visit my website at wonderfullymade139.com. We will see you next month for another episode of Wonderfully Made. God bless you.